Running back Saquon Barkley and his legendary reverse hurdle are the cover of Madden NFL 26. Everything is coming up Saquon right now, including in Philadelphia. The iconic Geno's Steaks in South Philly is lending its facade to the honor. They are now selling Steakwans for the moment and are actually delicious no matter what you call them, but one way or the other. They now have Steakwans there after Saquon Barkley had what I think one could argue was as good a season as any NFL team has ever had, or any NFL running back has ever had. He won the rushing title during the year, 2,005 rushing yards, opted against going for the all-time single-season record, which he could have done. He then joined Emmitt Smith and Terrell Davis as the only players ever to lead the league in rushing and then win the Super Bowl. He won the rushing title, the Offensive Player of the Year, and the Super Bowl. Terrell Davis, the only player before him to win all three in the same season since 1972, which is when Offensive Player of the Year was first awarded. And then Barkley had 11 games with 100 rushing yards last year, the most by any player in their first season with a team in NFL history. And so as I sit here, start going over football notes, Dominique Foxworth, I don't know that everyone knows this about you, but you are an analytics geek. You are like that kind of analytics-driven nerd. And so it brings me to the question. Listen to Hembo laughing back there as the shoe fits. It brings me to the question. Is last year, did we see the beginning of a renaissance at running back? Was that a blip or was that the beginning of a trend?
Well, I resent you calling me an analytics nerd. I'm not a nerd. I'm a tough guy, like my favorite Jeff Saturday. And I think what we're seeing is not the resurgence of the running back as much as we're seeing the resurgence of the running game. As defensive lines get smaller and linebackers get smaller in order to rush the passer, it feels like the Eagles are a perfect example of the O-line is getting bigger. They have tackles at guard. They're enormous, and they use that advantage to run the ball. So because of some of the things in the salary cap and generally the amount of running backs that you can find, I'm not sure that we're going to see a resurgence or a newfound respect for the running back itself. But I do think, to your point, analytics is about finding advantages. And right now, there seems to be an advantage in getting big and getting physical in the modern NFL.
So let's make sure that we're clear on what we're saying here, Tim Hasselbeck. What he's saying is that defenses, in order to try and contain all these high-octane passing games, have gotten smaller. And so the offenses have swung the pendulum in the other direction and gotten bigger.
I think it's accurate. Look, if you just look at starting defenses, a lot of people, when they put up their starting defense, there's a third corner. I mean, they're essentially in nickel defense, as their, primary defense. So, the days of, a standard 4-3 with, big, run-stuffing linebackers, those days are long gone. And in fact, it really probably, you go back to like Pete Carroll at USC, facing Oregon, where you had these like hybrid safety linebackers, that all of a sudden became kind of like this, big nickel. And so a lot of people are playing like that. Well, like, getting into, run looks and running the football, as Neek said, with like now all of a sudden, like investing in guards, investing, not just at the tackle position to be able to run the football. And then you pair that, let's be fair too to Saquon, pair that with an elite runner. There's not, a Saquon Barkley on every team. You do that, now all of a sudden, it is different. So, I think that's 100% happening, and that's why I know we're planning on going this direction. That's why I think what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do with the Chargers, I think is on the mark. Just, a little side note there.
Meaning he's putting together, he's building his team around an offensive line. They drafted a running back. He's looking to run the heck out of it.
Yeah, 290-pound fullback. He's got like his plan is to basically beat you with a sledgehammer. I mean, that's his plan.
Well, Jeff Darlington, I mean, you're out there covering these games every single week, and you're talking to all the people who put them together. It did occur to me at some point last season, there is no better play than the explosive run. If every offense could have that in their arsenal, that's what they would choose to do over everything, because it has absolutely no risk or close to no risk, where on a passing play, so many different things could go wrong.
Well, statistically across the league, we did see, although very slim, we saw more running last year than previous years. That being said, passing is still the one thing that is going for more yards, and it's happening more often. Yes, there's more balance, but it still is a passing league. And you go back to the idea of value. It was a big story last year. Remember when we talked about the running back market, and when Saquon was leaving New York in the first place, the idea that teams did not want to pay running backs, I actually think, yes, the pendulum swings a little bit, but Saquon getting this big deal from the Eagles actually could make it even more complicated for running backs, because I still don't think teams are going to pay most running backs. I think it is very much a class system where we have Saquon, we have Derrick Henry, maybe Josh. There's some guys, maybe Bijan Robinson, but I really don't think that we're all of a sudden going to see this influx of money when general managers that I've talked to would still rather draft a guy, and I know this sounds mean, but run him into the ground and draft another guy after that. I think the idea that Saquon will, that a high tide raises all boats, I don't think that pertains to the running back market. Saquon is an anomaly and an outlier.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and Saquon himself still isn't getting paid as much as you would expect for the impact that he's having. Like, the position itself,
right,
the value isn't changed. And to Jeff's point, there were 25 running backs in the draft this year. That suggests that we respect the running game, but it doesn't necessarily suggest that we respect the running back, because we'll see how many of those guys get big money extensions when the time comes.
Tim, I got 15 seconds. Finish it.
Yeah, the delta between the top, Saquon and the next guys is greater than it is for running backs, 5 through 25.
Yeah. So it's just going to be the guys at the very top. I'm telling you, just watch for these rookie runners, Ashton Genty obviously being at the top of the list, to smash their way into the league and make a huge impact. Up in the NFL, our next game is called Buy or Sell. Hey, Dominique Foxworth, Caleb Williams and the Bears making the playoffs. You buying or selling?
Yeah, I'm buying. I know the division is very tough, but Caleb is immensely talented, and they've added a coach and an offensive line that can do some of the things that we've talked about earlier in this show. Run the ball. Running the ball takes pressure off of everyone on your team, your offense and your defense and your quarterback. And if they can effectively do that the way that the Lions did, I think that Caleb, who's an extremely talented quarterback, will have a really good season, and his team could sneak into the playoffs.
Also drafted a good pass-catching tight end in round one. Jeff, if I were to say the Steelers are going to finish last in the AFC North, buy or sell?
I am selling because of two reasons. The first of which is I think that Aaron Rodgers will inevitably sign with the Steelers at some point, and it will improve the quarterback situation. I am also pointing out that we have another team in that division, unless there is a division realignment in the next several months where the Browns are no longer in the AFC North. I believe that the Steelers will avoid the cellar because, quite frankly, they'll have a better quarterback than the Browns and a better roster.
All right, well, you mentioned the Browns, so let's go to them. Tim Hasselbeck, if I said Shedeur Sanders is going to start the season as the starting quarterback in Cleveland, are you buying or selling?
I'm selling that. I mean, the reality is that quarterback room is super crowded. We've been talking about that, since the draft. And the guys that are in the quarterback room are qualified to win the job. Joe Flacco's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Kenny Pickett's a former first rounder that started games last year for the Super Bowl winning Eagles. So I just think that reps sound like they're going to be fairly even. And I believe that the guys that have the experience, like Flacco and Pickett have the upper hand in the competition if that's how it's going to go in Cleveland.
All right, I'm going to bookmark the starting week one piece of this in a minute. For those of you who haven't heard it, I wanted you to hear what Deion Sanders said. That's obviously Shedeur's father. He was on the Say What Needs to Be Said podcast with Asante Samuel. By now, you've probably all heard about all these reports that Shedeur Sanders wasn't prepared for meetings ahead of the NFL draft and whatever it was in his behavior that caused him to fall to the fifth round. Here's what Deion said about all of that.
When you sit up there and say something like, he went in a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who's had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and went up, leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're going to tell